All right, everyone. Welcome to the Low Production Value Sphere podcast, which is shot from my terrorist hideout in the Sudan. I have here with me today a kid who I thought deserved a little bit of exposure. He doesn't have a platform like mine. He's just starting out in broadcasting, so I thought I'd give him a leg up. How are you doing, Tucker Carlson?
How is your English so good? It's unbelievable. You sound like you grew up next to me, but I know that you're in the heart of a foreign city, so I'm impressed. Great to see you, man.
It really is great to talk to you. So I've got a bunch of questions, but earlier this week I was looking at the inauguration on C-SPAN and I see a mop of hair in the crowd and I literally just turned to my wife and said, "Oh, Tucker's there." So first question, so you were in DC. What's the vibe? Like what are you sensing? Like we're a few days in. Um what do you think?
Well, I've been thinking about it a lot because it's overpowering. So there are two, well, there are many levels, but here are the two big, the obvious levels. Within the government now in the control of Donald Trump, there's just incredible amounts of anxiety and jockeying
Yeah.
because this is, a form of revolution. And there's just a lot at stake. And the United States is in a position that's changing really rapidly in the world. People sense that they don't really know the details or the outlines, but they feel that America's place in the world is shifting really quickly. And that, causes all kinds of second order effects. So there's a huge effort by entrenched interests in Washington, business interests nationally to get control over this before it hurts them. And I see that at the sort of back end of, people pressuring and lobbying each other, lying about each other, leaking secrets about each other, making up stories about each other, all of it playing out in the press. I mean, it's just an unbelievable spectacle. It's just the Ottoman court at scale. So there's that. And then so that's distressing. Not distressing, but as shocking, maybe more shocking, is the reaction in DC, where, I spent my life. I got there 40 years ago when my dad went to work for the government, in a complicated part of government. And so I have grown up around it, lived in Georgetown starting at the age of 15. So I feel like I know the city really well, really well. Ultimately, 5 years ago, next month, 5 years ago, I had to leave because of Trump. I was considered too close to Trump. That became just untenable. I mean, it was just not even worth living there. So that's the context I have for DC. This weekend, I walked all around the city. I saw a million people I know. Of course, as I said, I'm from there. And I didn't hear one person attack Trump or even express concern about Trump. It was 100%.
That's
We love
fascinating.
Trump and we love you because you love Trump. I've never seen anything like it. I could barely get off the airplane. People grabbed me on the jet bridge in Washington, D.C., which is the world capital for hating Trump, because Trump is the most disruptive to government, of course. And
Yeah.
I mean, they really hated him. They hated him far more than they ever hated, say, Osama bin Laden. You know what I mean? No, I mean it. I never went to one. I was there
I
for
know
the
you do.
entire war on terror. I never was at one dinner party where someone turned to me and said, I really hate Osama bin Laden. Not one time. But that happened to me with Trump every time I went to dinner. This time, it was almost it was almost hysteria, the love for Trump in Washington. Now, a lot of these people, had come in for the inauguration, but it wasn't just them. It was people who live there, who I
Right.
know, my former neighbors. I've never seen, and I'm not overstating. In fact, I was bothered by it. It was so shocking. Like, what is this exactly? Is this sincere? I don't know. I called my wife. I said, "You wouldn't even." And my wife, was an early Trump adopter, was a fan of Trump's from the very beginning, and is a very sweet, non-political Christian person. But even she took a lot of crap for liking Trump, and she didn't even believe me. I told her on the phone, everybody loves Trump here. I walked down K Street, and people are like honking their horns, waving at me because they think I've met Trump before. It was, I don't know what to make of it. I'm just telling you.
That's crazy. That is fascinating.
Yes.
Well, so you touched on what I wanted to talk to you about. which I think is very interesting and is very interesting for this podcast. Yeah, one of the intros I wanted to make is that I've invited you on a podcast where at least half the people who are watching are going to hate you because it's a podcast for people in DC, but apparently they love you now again. Uh,
Well,
but
can I say, like, I don't, I mean, you never know what motivates people. It's hard to read people sometimes.
yeah.
It's potentially a case of, we welcome our new alien overlords and look forward to toiling in their underground sugar caves. I don't know. Like, we are hardwired to accept the invading army as liberators because we have no choice. I mean, this is a pretty well recognized phenomenon. And it may just be that Trump's capture of the city is so complete. The siege ramp was successful. The walls have fallen. He controls the wells. Like, what are you going to do?
Yes.
Fight him? I don't know. I really don't know.
That no, but it is interesting time. So I mean, anyway, so you and I met a long time ago, and you and I have talked about this. I think certainly one of the reasons why I find you such a likable and relatable person is we sort of share this trait of having grown up in the elite of our respective countries and being part of it and breathing it and going to the same schools and the same neighborhoods and eventually at some point in our life realizing, oh, like these people are actually driving my country into the ditch.
Yes.
And I find this phenomenon fascinating. There's a French version of it, there's an American version of it. So I guess my question is, what made you change your outlook? Like, I'm not even asking, like, what's the moment? What radicalized you, Tucker Carlson? But, what was the process or the thing that made you realize, oh, like, there's something rotten in Denmark?
I mean, there are a million, it was an incremental process that kind of came to fruition in 2016 with Trump. I mean, I've been thinking about this since 2003, since the winter of 2003 when I went to Iraq and saw that the
Right.
things I'd advocated for were a disaster. And that set off a chain reaction on my head. Like, how could this happen? Everyone I know, was involved in this and, family members and, my whole world is implicated in this war. And it's like, it's not what I thought it was. So I've been thinking about this for a while. Trump accelerated that, brought it to a head, forced me out of the city into exile. Made me, I spent 5 years thinking about it really deeply. But my conclusion is that it's really just wealth is the problem. I mean, this is just a pretty straightforward Christian story. It corrupts. Too much money corrupts you. And if you have a class with too much money for too long or a family with too much money for too long, it becomes corrupt and contemptible and decadent in its attitudes and ultimately dishonest and indefensible and like incapable of defending itself. And then it falls. Like this is of course the cycle. And I just happened by virtue of the fact of I was born in 1969 to kind of be there at maturity for the end of this cycle. And I didn't recognize it as such when I first noticed something was going on. I didn't really know what it was, but I have come to believe that the more money you have, the more likely you are to be deluded. Certainly, the more you worship money, the more certainly you are deluded. It's the same trifecta. It's money, power, sex. These are the things that destroy people, that rot your soul. And the more freely available they are, and the more you worship them, like the more likely you are to serve evil. So at a certain point, that becomes a class distinction. So like, the people
Right.
who are just rolling in money from 11 or 12 years of zero interest rates after the subprime crisis, after
Right.
the mortgage crisis in 08, there's trillions of dollars printed and it wound up clustering around, small groups of people. And those people became crazy and evil as a result of it. I mean, I think it's a much more complicated story than that, but those are its outlines. And those are its essential outlines. You pour trillions of dollars into a country unearned. And what do you think is going to happen? Everyone's going to be like the fourth generation of a rich family. And, of course, in Europe, where you have true generational wealth spanning 10 or 20 generations,
Right.
it's very recognizable. You've got truly decadent, evil people at the top because of the structure of your system. And we haven't had that. Now we do. So I really think that's it. That's kind of the story.
Interesting. Well, I mean, okay, so devil's advocate,
Please.
advocate for rich people.
Yeah, I am a rich person. Just to be clear, always have been.
Right. Uh, well, no, so you bring up the point of Europe, like some people whose ancestors were rich 1,000 years ago are very impressive today,
Yes.
and some of them aren't. So, and like powerful people in America 50 years ago were very rich, like impossibly rich.
Well, there's no question. I mean, these are broad. I mean, my family was rich 150 years ago. I feel like I'm a kind of okay person. I'm not. It's not axiomatic. The more money you have, the worse you are. But it is true that over populations, you
Right.
increase the likelihood of decadence and evil if you, especially unearned money. I mean, that is just true. I'm not calling for confiscatory inheritance taxes or anything like that. I'm not suggesting public policy solutions. I'm just noting that people who worship money are evil. And I don't, that may have been maybe a common observation in Europe. It's never observed here. And I've just seen it up close a lot, a lot. You shouldn't worship money. It's not bad to be rich, but if that's the center of your life, then it's super,
Yeah.
super bad. Um, and all the kind of attendant problems with that, like you just in a democracy that doesn't work. It doesn't work because
Yeah.
you're out of step with the majority of the population. It's inherently anti-democratic. If you're in charge of the country, like the charter is your mandate is like represent the bulk of the population, the majority of the people. Like this is their country, they own it. You don't. You're the representative, and wealth allows you to ignore what's actually happening in your country, but it also insulates you to such an extent you might not notice. Anyway, I just think the story of America is this in the last 40 years is the story of exploding wealth. And I know that because I grew up here in a rich neighborhood
Right.
in which not one person had a plane and everybody had, a ski house in Tahoe and everyone drove and everyone's, stayed in a motel. I mean, we did.
Right.
And everyone ate at like Denny's or like a diner by the side of the road that
Right. Right.
all classes of people ate at. I don't know I don't know anyone who would drive 8 hours to a ski house or eat
Right.
at Denny's. Like the classes have just become so completely divided in a way
Right.
that they weren't. It's not an egalitarian country. Now, as a Northern European, my
Right.
instinct is egalitarian. That's just what it is. Like it's genetic. I'm Scandinavian. Like and that's by the way a Protestant thing too. Like
Yes.
we're all in this together.
Yes. I'm a Latin Catholic. I don't
Right,
mind.
exactly. No, you're used to.
I hate the peasants.
Of course,
It's
you
okay.
you beat your servants with a cane every morning. I have no problem with that. It's more a Hindu outlook, but
It's it's
but
it's it's our tradition. It's our Latinx tradition.
no, but like America, nobody wants to say it was a Northern European Protestant country. That was the whole
Yes.
that was the whole point of it. And up until pretty recently, really, certainly my childhood, that was true. And now it's not true. So there have been all kinds of changes to the structure of society, and you expect that over time they will get worked out. But we are definitely in the middle of a dramatic pivot. And Trump is, probably the last white male Protestant president we're ever going to have. You know, and he has those attitudes. He has vestiges of those attitudes, that egalitarianism, which is a Protestant thing. I'm
Yeah,
not.
no, have
Yeah,
absolutely like 100%. And like, I mean, this is one of the things that bothered me during the whole sort of BLM thing. It's like, oh, that's white. I was like, no, that's not white. That's Anglo and Protestant. I'm
right.
white and I'm not like this.
No, that is totally true. And I've, spent enough of my life outside the country to have genuine, not just performative, but sincere respect for other people's cultures, which I think seem to work pretty well. But I'm speaking of my own
Right,
culture, which I loved. And I'm not claiming it's morally superior to any other Christian culture. I would say it's
right,
totally superior to all pagan cultures, but it's not superior to French Catholic culture. I don't think that it is, but it's mine, and
right.
it's what made America America. And it's gone, and so that's what I mean. That's a function of
Yeah, yeah,
demographics.
yeah. No, but that. I agree, or I get that, which is there was an egalitarian ethos in the sense that
Yes.
somebody who had a lot of money didn't dress particularly differently, didn't, lived in a bigger house, but it was basically the same kind of house. He had a Cadillac instead of but it was still like basically a GM car and all
Yes.
that.
But
And that's changed.
it
Like
was deeper than
rich
that.
people now live in compounds
Yes.
with armed guards.
And they go to the front of the line. It's the change in attitudes. I remember
Yes.
when before we had TSA, but when airports, I guess when we got TSA in 2001, airports installed this thing called TSA Pre, which allowed you to cut to the front of the line if you had some special paperwork. And I remember of course, I was an instant beneficiary of it because I travel a lot. I'm not going to stand at the back of the line. So I was enrolled in the program. However, I thought it was weird. Or you can pay extra money to go to the front of the line at Disneyland. You can't go to the front of the line because we're all citizens. And no matter how rich you are,
Yeah.
no matter how poor I am, we have the same rights. We have the same inherent dignity because we're both created by God. And we have a court system that treats us identically.
Yep.
And that was America right there. Those attitudes. Even if you like had, a 30,000 square foot house and I lived in a one room apartment, we were equal before God and equal before the law. And that sense has totally disappeared. And it's because the people around the country don't have those attitudes, for a bunch of reasons. But it's so that's changed.
Yeah. And one score for French Latin Catholic culture. Um, it One thing that really helped that was military service.
Yes.
And I think they don't do it anymore. But for example, if you were at the military academy, so the French equivalent of West Point, if you were admitted, first you spent a year as a private, and then you matriculated to university and you were like a aspiring officer. But you had to spend a year as a private
Oh,
um, to see what it's like from the other end. Um,
what is it like? It's pretty. Everyone says that the bathrooms in the French army are like filthier than anything in rural India. Is that true?
I have never heard this. They stopped military service. I'm the last generation of my family to not have served in the military, um, which is a shame. But I've never. I mean, I assume it's not luxurious, but I've never heard this.
Wow. Okay.
I love finding out the things that people believe about France and about French people. It's always interesting.
Well, and I think they're mostly true, don't you?
I mean, stereotypes usually are. Um,
I'm totally. I actually am one of the only Americans who will admit he loves France. I love the language. I love the food. I think the women are beautiful. I think the cigarettes are strong but very good. I mean, there's everything about the country I like. So
it's a we don't care.
that's what I love most. I love I love the self-esteem of the French. I do.
Yeah. We need an extra shot of it right now, but historically it's true. Um, yeah, so I mean, I think we've covered Washington because I had a bunch of questions, but like, the what you said just sort of covers it. I mean, I guess, you know, I hate to ask this question, but you can skip it if you want. But like, if you had to do one thing to sort of fix Washington, like if you had a magic wand, if you were dictator for 24 hours, is there anything? Is there a single thing?
Yes. Instantly, I would radically reduce the number of classified documents and change the classification laws. There would be no
Yeah, that's
default
actually very smart.
classification to
Yeah.
anything. And it's the veil of secrecy that allows the filth and the crimes and the murders to continue. It's just kind of that simple. There's a reason there's so much secrecy. By the way, it's super handy guide for anyone watching at home. If you want to know if someone's on the side of good or evil, and it's often a question, it's hard to know. The people pushing for disclosure are the good people, and the people defending secrecy are the bad people. And if you have children, there's almost privacy is sacred and should never be violated. Secrecy is something very different. And
Right.
there's almost never any justification for secrecy in a democracy because the people own the government. Now, if you're, invading Normandy at 8 a.m. tomorrow, you can hide it from me for a week, but you can't 80 years later keep the details from me. And the only reason you would do that is because you're committing crimes, and they are committing crimes. And so, I would change that and let the population of the country assess what their money is achieving. And, their name is being used to justify this stuff. And that's why I think, guys like Snowden and Assange are not just, worthy of pardons, but they're heroes. They're not the criminals. The person who tells me what my government is doing is not a criminal. It's the government or the officials in the government are committing these crimes who should be punished. They should be in exile in Moscow. They should be locked in the Bolivian, Ecuadorian embassy for 7 years. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, Moscow's a lovely. Oh, I'm stupid. You're famous for thinking that Moscow is a lovely city.
It's
Uh,
it's look. This is not a partisan or political or
yeah, yeah.
ideological point. It's the prettiest city in Europe, and yes, it is Europe. I mean, there's nothing even comes close to it as far as for a real city. It's the biggest city, 12 million people. Yeah, it's a stunning achievement, and draw whatever conclusions you want. I'm not even sure what conclusions I'm drawing from. I don't really understand why it's so great, but and everyone should go there and judge for yourself.
No, it is a beautiful city. I was there a long time ago. I haven't been since, but it is a very beautiful city. Um, let's stop talking about politics. So, in preparation for this, I read some of your earlier work, and I remember that you were a magazine writer. Um, do you miss writing? Do you, because even your monologues at Fox, like you can tell they were written by a writer's writer. Like you're a guy who enjoys prose, who enjoys the written word. Have you thought about getting back to writing?
Well, I do write, every day. I have, I mean, it's no exaggeration to say, I have hundreds of people I correspond with, and I work out my thoughts because I do have trouble thinking without writing, or the act of writing forces
Yeah.
the writer to think through what he believes and to make connections that you just don't make verbally. Only writing does that for me. And so, I write for hours every day. And that's enough for me. I don't have any interest or need to like show it off. I'm a capable writer. I've made a living writing that's what I really did in television was write. And I sort of made the point. I don't feel like I need to display that in public, but I need to do it as a daily discipline, and I do it. But you go through phases in your life. I'm 55. I have a couple of other passionate work related interests, and the main one being I want to understand what's happening in the world as it resets into a multipolar form, whatever that takes. And so I've spent the last year and a half, not mostly out of the country, but a lot of time out of the country, both for work, doing journalism, but also probably primarily for myself to understand. Because I mean, I see my job as trying to understand what's happening. Like if I were to put my job in one sentence, try to figure out what's happening and tell people about it as clearly as you can and honestly as you can. But first you have to figure it out. I haven't done that. I'm in the process of doing it, but I've just been a lot of places and I've learned so much, and it's just been a marvelous time in my life. And I'm grateful for it. And I think it's really affected my job. Like that's a huge part of my job now.
Okay. Can like what's that's fascinating. Like what have you learned? Like what's the main thing you've taken away from your foreign travels over the past, I don't know, year, 18 months?
Just that power's shifting in the world. I mean, as you look, I'm very American, extremely. I see everything through an American lens. And it really deeply matters to me what happens to the United States. I'm not a citizen of the world or any of that nonsense. I mean, I'm American on every level, and I will be until I die. So, from an American perspective, the U.S. has lost a lot of power in the last say 20 years, since 9/11, 20, almost 25 years. And and I don't think most Americans understand that. I don't think that had to happen. Maybe it was like inevitable in some historical sense, or from the perspective of destiny. No empire can live forever, but we certainly hastened its demise. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is that in the United States, domestic politics is almost an afterthought to the extent it even exists. In Washington, there is really no concern at all about what's happening in the United States. How high prices are, what we're going to do, within our energy policy, the fact that you've got 200,000 people dying of drug ODs every year, which is unprecedented. The fact that housing prices are way beyond the reach of almost all young people who aren't, generationally rich, et cetera, et cetera. Like, these are huge problems. People aren't getting married. They're not having children. Everyone's gay. I mean, it's like the country's falling apart. But there's no acknowledgement in that because there's no interest in it. All the attention is focused on how we can project American power abroad for whatever reason. You can guess as to the motive there, but I'm just telling you, that's all they care about. That's all they care about. I mean, getting a seat on the Intel Committee or the Foreign Affairs Committee, that is the highest level of service in the United States Congress. And like, what is that? So in other words, all of Washington is focused on the rest of the world, which they don't understand, whose languages they don't speak. But they fancy themselves experts. They know nothing. They're like truly profoundly ignorant, but they're experts, subject area expert. And nobody in the United States has any idea what's happening there because there's a full media blackout on the rest of the world. I mean, Americans were told with a straight face that Putin blew up his own natural gas pipeline because he's evil. And evil people ultimately just attack themselves for, they run out of victims and they just blow up their own infrastructure just for the pure animal joy of breaking things. Like they were told that.
Yeah.
And they believed it because how would they know that that's not true? So that has been so interesting to see what the U.S. government is doing and has done abroad. It's just heartbreaking, as someone who really believes in the United States. And, I grew up my dad worked for the government in a foreign affairs type job. So I can hardly believe what I'm seeing. And bits and pieces filter down. It's like, oh, wait, I think we may have rigged the election in Poland. Or we seem to be messing with the internal politics of, I don't know, pick a country, Romania, South Korea, Albania. All true. Venezuela, they're American U.S. government personnel in Venezuela right now. What are they doing there? Well, they're trying to overthrow the government. Same with Russia, we're trying to overthrow the government. But I don't think they don't really think about what that means. First of all, in the United States, foreign policy drives domestic policy. What we're doing abroad, we will do to our own people. Okay. So if we are rigging elections abroad, not against Mossadegh in 1953, I mean, like right now in Europe, then why wouldn't the intel agencies and the national security state rig our own elections? Well, of course they would. And they have.
Right.
So it's just given me a wild perspective and just a really deep reservoir of hostility. Like I can't even believe they're doing this. This is outrageous. They have no right to do that. I feel totally American. I feel like my family helped found this country. You have no right to do. Who are you? You have no right to do this because you got your stupid little uniform and your fake medals on there. You get to like do all this stuff to my country. No, I mean it. I'm not joking. I mean, call me deluded if you want. I feel ownership. I feel like I'm a citizen. I'm a shareholder in this country. I'm a legacy shareholder of this country. And some douchebag fat general gets to like wreck the world in my name. No, stop it, son, right now. I mean, I don't feel like the serf at all.
We're going to run out of time, sadly. We have a traditional last question that we ask all guests. It's a very long tradition from 3 weeks ago.
My favorite kind.
It's the best kind. Recommend a book, any book that's not in your area of expertise.
Oh man, I wish I could flip this thing around. Well, I probably could flip this thing around. I'm sitting in my office right now, and I'm just gonna actually because I'm going to Saudi Arabia tomorrow, so I'm.
Ooh.
I'm bringing this. I
Oh,
have a whole shelf. So I think Woodhouse wrote like 105 books total. Speaking of the great
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Grenville Woodhouse, um, and I think something like 80 odd of those were novels, his famous novels. And I bring with me when I travel, and day to day, the only two things I
That's a
read
very good recommendation.
at all. I My son gave me the used collected paperback versions of the Woodhouse novels, so they're just easy to pack. I'm bringing tomorrow when I leave. I'm bringing Uckridge, written in 1924. I've read it before, but probably not in 35 years. Amazingly hilarious. I read two things. I read P.G. Woodhouse and I read the Bible. And I've read my whole life. And but for the last 2 years, I've only read P.G. Woodhouse and the Bible. I've done the Bible. I've read the Bible twice through. I'm now I'm at Genesis 5. I'm starting for the third time as of last night, and I feel like that's enough. I mean, I read a lot. I've read a lot, and now all I want. Maybe I'll next year. I'm sure I'll change, but for the last 2 years, P.G. Woodhouse, the Holy Bible, and that's it. And I feel like that has been enough for me.
That's an excellent recommendation. Tucker Carlson, thank you very much for your
Heck, you're the
time.
best.
It's always fun and interesting talking to you. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you for having me. And we're gonna have dinner next time I'm in Paris. I think your country is boy. There's a country I don't understand but want to. Um,
That's definitely true.
yeah, I don't understand it, but I just think it's so interesting, and so I'm very psyched for dinner for the full explanation.
All right. Goodbye, sir.
Thank you. See
Thank
you, man.
you.